Albert II, the Degenerate, was a Margrave of Meissen, Landgrave of Thuringia and Count Palatine of Saxony. He was a member of the House of Wettin. He was the eldest son of Henry the Illustrious Margrave of Meissen by his first wife, Constantia of Austria. In 1265 Margrave Henry III granted the Landgraviate of Thuringia and a Palatinate to Albrecht and the Margraviate of Landsberg in the Osterland to his younger brother Dietrich. Henry III kept for himself the Margraviates of Meissen and Lusatia as a formal power over his sons. In June 1255 Albert married Margaret of Sicily, the daughter of Emperor Frederick II, who was also King of Sicily, and Isabella of England. Margaret, also known as Margaret of Schwaben, was a sister of Henry Otto, also known as Karl Otto. As a dowry, the Pleisland was pledged to the House of Wettin. Albert and Margaret had 5 children. Henry, Lord of Pleisnerland, inherited the Pleisnerland in 1274. Frederick, Margrave of Meissen. Dietrich, called Diesmin, Margrave of Lusatia. Margaret, Agnes, married before the 21st of July 1282 to Henry I, Duke of Brunswick-Grubenhagen. After what was at first a happy rule and marriage, Albert turned away from Margaret and began a passionate love affair with Kunigunde of Eisenberg. She bore him 2 children, a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1269, and a son, Albert, in 1270. When she discovered the adultery and the illegitimate births, Margaret left Wartburg on the 24th of June 1270 and went to Frankfurt am Main, where she died on the 8th of August of the same year. The 2 younger sons, Frederick and Diesmin, were looked after by their uncle, Theodoric of Landsberg. Henry, the oldest, disappeared in Silesia in 1282. Albert married Kunigunde in 1274 and legitimized their children. When Albert intended to leave the Landgraviate of Thuringia to Apitz and compensate his sons from his first marriage with only the Osterland and the County Palatine of Saxony, they began a war against the father. Frederick was captured by his father and was locked up in Wartburg Castle. However, he escaped 1 year later and continued the war against his father together with Diesmin. During this time, in 1284, their uncle Theodoric of Landsberg died, and 4 years later, in 1288, Henry the Illustrious, Albert's father, also died. These deaths heightened the family disputes. At the death of his father, Albert became Margrave of Meissen, while his nephew Frederick Tutor, son of Theodoric of Landsberg, inherited the Margraviate of Lusatia, which was sold off by Albert's son Diesmin in 1303. Shortly after, Frederick captured his father Albert in battle. By the Treaty of Rochlitz, Albert obtained his freedom after the renunciation of large parts of his lands. He retained Meissen for himself, but later sold it to Frederick Tutor, when after his death his cousins Frederick and Diesmin arbitrarily took possession of his lands. Albert, suffering financial difficulties, was compelled to sell Thuringia in 1293 to the German King Adolf of Nassau. In the contract, it was stipulated that the king could take possession of the lands after Albert's death. In the sale, Albert included Meissen and Osterland as his fiefs, despite the fact they were in the hands of his sons. Thanks to this, Adolf's successor, Albert I of Habsburg, was able to take possession of these lands, claiming that the contract of sale was legitimate and lawful. Kunigunde of Eisenberg died on the 31st of October 1286. 4 years later, on the 1st of October 1290, Albert married thirdly Elizabeth of Orleman, heiress of Nordalben and widow of Hartmann She of Lobdeberg-Arnshaw. The same year, Apit's Albert's son by Kunigund was formally legitimized by the emperor and created heir of Tenneberg. On the 11th of April 1291, Apit's younger full sister, Elizabeth, married Henry III of Frankenstein. The marriage was short-lived and childless. Elizabeth died on the 28th of September 1293. 3 years later, Apit's married a sister of his brother-in-law Henry III, apparently also called Elizabeth. This marriage, like his sister's, was childless. 4 years later, Albert's eldest surviving son, Frederick, married Elizabeth of Lobdeberg-Arnshoek, daughter of his stepmother. This made the final reconciliation between father and son. 5 years later, Apit's of Tenneberg died, aged 35. The death of his favorite son was a terrible blow to Albert. He never recovered from the loss. 2 years later, in 1307, Albert finally resigned the Landgraviate of Thuringia and the County Palatine of Saxony to his son Frederick in exchange for an annuity. He died 7 years later in Erfurt, aged 74. Ancestors